Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. Today I'm going to talk about how the trees did over the winter here in the plant room. My plant room here has undergone a lot of changes over the years. I used to have more windows up higher in the plant room and a taller ceiling, and then I took that all down. I rebuilt the roof and insulated it really well. And that part of the plant room is working really well. I can now heat the plant room, keeping my heater on low for most of the winter, and then sometimes I have to turn it up to 2 when it gets really cold out. But I've never run it on 3 this year, so it's way more efficient heat-wise in the plant room with all this insulation and sealing it all up. So that part of the plant room is working really well. This year I added grow lights and new benches in the plant room, and they worked well on some of the trees, and some of the trees didn't do so well. I'm kind of always experimenting. I have my basement below the plant room here for my temperate trees, and the basement stays at about 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit for most of the winter. It fluctuates a little bit, but not a whole lot. So any temperate trees, I keep them downstairs. They kind of keep cool for the winter. So my plant room here is more for the tropical trees. And yeah, let's have a look at the trees. Some trees did really well over the winter, and some trees didn't do so well. Let's start with the ceiling of the plant room. So I added this false ceiling to it. So there's an air space, like a little attic above it for airflow. I've got vents that air comes from outside and keeps the insulation nice, keeps the humidity out of the woodwork up there. And that part of it's worked really well. The room is basically sealed in plastic, so there's very little humidity and heat that escapes out of this room. And that part of it's worked well. As I said, you know, I could heat this room very cheaply because it's well insulated and sealed up. So this year I added these benches, they're scaffolding, and I have grow lights that were given to me. And so I've got 4 grow lights, 2 on this bench, and then there's 2 on this bench over here. LED grow lights, and some of the trees did really well. So trees that did exceptionally well are my Ficus Benjaminas. So there's my root over temple there, my Franken Ficus, which I pruned heavily, but it was growing really well over the winter. I have my Little Leaf Ficus down here, which also grew really well over the winter, and my other Ficus Benjamina here. So they all did well, the Ficus Benjaminas, and they are like a true tropical tree. I've tried the Benjaminas in the basement over the winter, and they do okay until about January. Then the leaves start kind of turning black on the tips, and so they don't like the cold at all. So they're very happy here in the plant room. So I'll continue growing all my Ficus Benjaminas in the plant room here. The next tree we're going to look at is the Ficus Microcarpas. Now, the Ficus Microcarpa is more of a temperate tree. They do grow in the tropics for sure, but I found that they do well having the cool period in the winter. So this year I tried them in the plant room under the grow light, and you can see I haven't pruned this, and it hasn't grown much. Like, I got some tips extending, but very little, even though it's in here warm, humid, with good light. And you can see the grow light's slightly offset, so this side of the tree's more under the grow lights, and this side gets more of the natural light from the windows. And there's not a whole lot of difference. Like, there's a little bit more growth from the grow lights, but basically the Microcarpas stayed dormant over the winter. And there's my other one over here, and you can see there's been very little new growth on it, even though it's under grow lights and in good condition. So I think I'll just continue growing those in the basement. And they seem to do well in the basement. They just sit there dormant for the entire winter. And then when I warm them up in spring, they just grow like crazy. Now, the only thing I have gotten as a benefit from the plant room here is I've got a few aerial roots that came out on the Ficus Microcarpa. So you can see the new shoots down there, the new roots. So that's the only benefit from the humidity here, is that I got a few aerial roots, and there's some on this one also coming off the trunk and branches. But I don't think that's enough of a benefit to keep them in the plant room. So that'll clear out some space in the plant room here. I'll keep those in the basement for the winter. The next tree we'll look at is my Schefflera, my Dwarf Chaera here. And this was defoliated in the winter, and the new leaves grew in, and it's doing okay. Again, I've tried this in the basement, and it does okay down in the basement, but I think it grows better in the plant room here, so I think I'll continue keeping the Dwarf Chaera up here in the plant room. And it grew a lot of aerial roots also over the winter. I don't know if you can see them in there, but yeah, it grew a lot of aerial roots. So I think that one does better in the plant room here than in the basement. My other Schefflera, which is the Australian umbrella tree, it's not a dwarf one, it's a true tropical, and it did okay in the plant room. It doesn't have like direct light over it, but it has pretty good light back there. It did okay. It didn't really grow. The growing tips kind of grew and then died back and grew and died back, and I'm not sure why. It may be just not enough light back there, or I'm not sure why. And I've also kept that in the basement over the winter, and it seems to do just as well. So I think that plant could either be kept cool for the winter or warm. I think it does equally well. So next, here is my Toprom Temple planting. And so the Nutal Ficus is more of a temperate tree. I just planted these trees on the temple, I guess near fall. So I wanted to keep them warm to grow aerial roots over the winter, and it sure did that. Like it grew aerial roots like crazy. It's amazing, actually. And so normally I keep them cool over the winter, these Nutal Ficus, and they do fine in the basement at 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So I think, you know, in future, once the aerial roots are set, I'll keep this cool for the winter. I have another Nutal Ficus over here, and it grew a little bit, not really well, and again, you know, probably not enough growth in the winter to warrant keeping it warm in the plant room. So I think the Nutal Ficus are quite happy to stay in the basement for the winter. Next, I have my banyan tree here, the Ficus bengalensis. Now this tree is, you know, native to like India, warm climates, and it did really well in the plant room. You can see all the new growth on it. This whole branch shot up this winter. And it's also getting aerial roots coming off the trunk, growing down into the soil. So that's another benefit of keeping it warm and humid. You get aerial roots coming off of it. So that definitely is happy here in the plant room for the winter. Beside that, I have my Brazilian rain tree, and you can see the top of it here. This is another tree that did really well in the plant room. It got a little cool in the plant room over, I think it was mid-February, and the plant room temperature dropped a bit, and it lost some of the leaves, but not many, and then it quickly regrew again. So that's another tree that's definitely liking the plant room, the Brazilian rain tree. It likes the warmth and humidity and light. Behind that is my powder puff. I gave that quite a pruning before, and over the winter it's grown in and it's really bushy now. So that's another tree that likes the warmth and humidity. So this one will definitely stay up here in the plant room also. Over here I have my rubber trees, my Ficus Elasticas. You can see I've got aerial roots growing out of the branches here. Nothing on the trunks, but it's growing out of the branches, which is a little unusual. These trees, I've also kept them in the basement over the winter, and they do okay in the basement. They start dropping their leaves kind of towards the end of winter, but they always recover once they get warmed up in spring. So I think the Ficus Elastica is happier here in the plant room. There's another one here that's growing well. But I think they could be overwintered in a cool environment just as well as the warm environment. I don't think it makes a big difference with them. My other Ficus Elastica, my little one, which is way back in here, also grew really well over the winter. It's got all kinds of aerial roots coming out. So I think I'll continue to keep them growing in the plant room. I think they do better than the basement, but they could be kept cool if I had to make more space. Over here I have my Ming Aelia planting, my Caboo Island, and these did really well over the winter. They just mainly get light from the window, but they sure grew well in the winter. They definitely like the humidity and the warmth. So these will definitely be continuing to grow up here in the plant room in winters. I don't think they would do well at all in the basement. They might even die. So that's one tree that's going to stay in the plant room for the winters. Back in here I have my Hibiscus Bonsai, and this is another tree. It's more of a temperate tree, and it didn't do very well here in the plant room over the winter. Hibiscus do need a cool period in the winter, and even though it's in good light here, the growth on it was very minimal. Yeah, you can see that it's, you know, the canopy's disappeared. It's got some growth on it, but nothing really to speak of. So that's definitely a tree that could stay cool for the winter, is the hibiscus. Behind that is my Norfolk Island pine forest. I've also kept this cool in the winter, and it seems to do okay. And I've also kept it in the plant room, and it also seems to do okay. So that's another tree that doesn't seem very fussy where you grow it. It could stay in the plant room for the winter, I think. It's probably better than the basement. Here are my Morton Bay Ficus. So this was the first one that I potted up, severely root pruned it, put it back in this kind of mesh basket, and it grew really well over the winter. It put on all kinds of new growth. There's roots growing across the surface of the soil. Yeah, it liked the warmth and humidity in the plant room. There's my second one behind it that also got a big root pruning, and it's growing really well. So the Morton Bay Ficus certainly likes a warm winter. Beside that is my Carpo tree. These have to stay warm. I found if they go below maybe 12 degrees Celsius or 55 degrees Fahrenheit, that they die. So this tree has to be kept warm in the winter, and you can see it's grown really well. It actually needs pruning. You can see a lot of yellow leaves, and they need more light. They need sunlight. They really like the sunshine. So once that gets out in the greenhouse, I think it'll really start growing with vigor. And these trees can grow super strong. Like, it'll double or triple the height over the summer. So that one has to stay warm for the winter. I have another tree back here, which is a silk floss tree, and it prefers the cooler temperatures in the winter, actually. It did okay here, but it's another one I think needs sunlight, so I think that one is better to keep cool for the winter. Next, I have my Bogan Vilas, and Bogan Vilas are a temperate tree. They like a cool winter. This year I kept it up here in the plant room, and It grew okay, but not great. And I think this one would prefer to have a cool winter. It kind of sets the flower buds and gives the tree a rest. So I think I'll continue overwintering this one in the basement next year. It just didn't like staying warm over the whole winter. Next is my Aloe Bonsai here. This one really liked growing here in the winter. It did really well. Lots of aerial roots coming off of it, good strong growth, compact growth. It did really well. So the aloe, I'll definitely keep it warm for the winter. Now I have kept the aloes cool in the winter, and they do equally as well. They're a very tough plant. So either way, you know, if you want it to grow over the winter, you can keep it warm. If you just want to put it in the basement, forget about it, they do fine there too. I kept my other aloe in the basement and it looks perfectly healthy. So my crown of thorns over here, it's doing well in the plant room. I've also kept this one cool in the winter, and it does equally as well. It just sits dormant. And so either way for the crown of thorns, I think. Behind that is my baobab trees. This winter I kept the plant room a little warmer than I did last year. And the buds are turning green now on them. I checked the video from last year and they were already starting to come out into leaf. Now I did repot these last year too, which may be a factor. But they're definitely alive. I've just got to wait for those leaves to get a little stronger and then I'll begin watering them. And I'll probably move them out to the greenhouse once the weather warms up a bit more. And these are another tree that I like to keep above at least 12 degrees Celsius, 15 preferably. If they get any colder than that, you risk losing the tree. So they have to be kept warm. And unlike, you know, some succulents, these ones don't mind the humidity here in the plant room. I don't water them at all over the winter. They just stay perfectly dry in the corner there. And there's enough humidity in the air to keep the roots happy and the trees happy. I think, I've heard anyway, that if you keep them in a dry environment over the winter, that you might have to water them a bit. That it's just too dry for them. But here in the plant room, I don't have to water them at all. They just go dormant. Now this year, you can see the dried leaves on the top of it. It was in leaf when I brought it in fall. And I just stopped watering it and slowly the leaves dried up. So that's how I got it to go dormant. Normally, outside, the leaves fall off by themselves as it gets cooler in fall. But this year they didn't. I guess they were super vigorous after the repotting. What else do I have in here? My Christmas cactus. Here's another tree that you can keep either cool or warm in the winter. Yeah, it grew a little bit. You know, even though it's by the window here, it didn't grow a whole lot. So, yeah, I don't know what's better, keeping it cool or warm in the winter. Probably cool. I think that'll help set the flower buds. Maybe, I don't know. I have a few acacias. Let's go over here. Here's my acacia, and I kept this warm in the winter, and it grew really well. It did really well. I've kept my other acacias cool in the basement, and they just go dormant. They lose their leaves, and then in spring they start regrowing again. So I think the acacia is one that's kind of in between. It's if it's cooled down for the winter, it goes dormant. If it's kept warm for the winter, it just kind of continues to grow. So I don't know what's better. I think most trees like some kind of a rest period. Our winters are really long here. And I think, you know, a short cool period would be really good for the acacias. So maybe keep them in the basement for up until about the end of December and then warm them up for the rest of the winter, or maybe even till the end of January and then start warming them up then. So I think, you know, a rest period's good, but our winters are too long. They go on forever, and I think it's too long a dormant period it's longer than they need. So it's probably best to cool them down in fall and then bring them in and warm them up eventually in the winter. My Bloodwood tree here, it did really well over the winter. It would put growth spurts on. It doesn't get enough light in here. It's not directly under a grow light. And I noticed that when we get a few sunny days, it comes out into all kinds of new leaves. And then after a while, the leaves all fall off. All that new growth just falls off, all the new leaves. And I think this is a tree that needs, you know, good strong sunlight on it. So it does okay up here in the plant room. I wouldn't want to put this one in the basement. They like to stay warm. And this is another tree that if you get it too cool in winter, it'll probably just die. So I keep this one again above 15 degrees Celsius or kind of 55 degrees Fahrenheit. So I think that one will do really well once it gets out in the greenhouse. Back in the corner here, I have my money tree. And that did well here in the warmth. When it's sunny out, it tends to grow a bit. And then for the rest of the winter, it just kind of sulks under the... It's a bit dark for it to grow with vigor. But it does quite well in the warm plant room. I think it does better. In the basement, it just loses all its leaves and stays dormant until it warms up in spring. So I think it's probably better to keep that one warm. Over here is my Fiddle Leaf Fig. This was growing near the window and it did really well over the winter. Definitely keeping this one warm is the best thing for it. Down here is my kryptonite, my desert rose forest. So I didn't water it all in the winter, and I think it's still too humid here in the plant room because 1, 2, and there was a third one out front that died. My big fat one did okay, and my little tiny one at the back is alive. But yeah, I think it's just too humid here, and they start to, I don't know if it rots the roots or what, but yeah, they just slowly died over the winter. So I'm thinking I'll try and keep, you know, the 2 that are living alive, and I'll replace them with maybe jades or something that can take a little more humidity. So I'll keep working on this planting, but instead of desert rose, maybe I'll have to use a different species that does better. I don't really have a warm, dry place to store them. I could keep them in the house, I guess, you know, near a sunny window or somewhere. It might be better than the plant room here. It'd be less humid, a little cooler temperature, but not too cool like the basement. And maybe I'll have more luck with the desert rose. I'm still working on keeping desert rose alive. I have a tough time growing them. I'm not sure why. I think it's just my conditions. The Nutal Plums are doing really well. I kept these mesquite trees here in the plant room. They did okay. They got a few insects on them now. I kept my kumquat tree here. No, that's not a kumquat. That's a lychee tree. A lychee tree. It did well over the winter. And then I have my, what are they? Jackfruits back there. And they, when it's sunny, they tend to gain vigor and grow. And then when it's dark and cloudy out, they tend to die back. So yeah, they're not real happy. Again, they need lots of light, I think. So that is an update to the plant room. So things I would change for next year. My water barrel here, I've noticed that when it cools down at night in the plant room, the water kind of cools down. And then if the sun is shining in the windows, it warms the plant room up and the water stays cool, and I get a lot of condensation on the outside of my barrel that runs down onto the floor. So I've got to put a catch pan underneath my water barrel in the winter. That's one thing I have to improve. So next year I'll do a little more plant selection. The Ficus Microcarpa will stay in the basement. There's a few other species that I'll keep cool over the winter. Keeping kind of the true tropicals up here in the plant room. I'm happy with the heating and the humidity. Everything seemed to go well. I didn't get any mold or mildew. It was, yeah, they had a pretty good year actually under the grow lights. The grow lights, you know, it costs a little bit of money to run them, but they're not that high a power. It's just, you know, one of those costs. If you're growing tropical trees in a cold climate, you've got to spend money on heat and lights. It's just the nature of the hobby. Unless you have like a really nice sunny south-facing window, then you don't need lights. I have run this plant room before without any lights, but again, the trees barely make it through the winter, and then once they go outside, they go all healthy again, and then you bring them in for the long winter and the health declines. So I think the LED lights certainly help. So yeah, I think that's it for my plant room performance. You would think after growing trees for over 30 years I would know exactly what trees to put where, but I don't know. I'm always kind of experimenting, and it depends a lot. You know, if you've recently repotted a tree, you might want to keep it warmer over the winter versus the cool basement. But I found, you know, keeping a tree cool for the winter, it gives them a rest, and they seem to store a lot of energy. So when spring comes, when you warm them up, they just explode in growth. If you keep them warm over the winter, they kind of grow slowly in the winter, and then when they go outside in spring, they don't have that big, huge growth spurt. It's more moderate, which might be a good thing with bonsai. If your tree's in refinement, you don't want that huge, rapid growth spurt. But if your tree's in development, maybe it's better to cool them down in the winter and then let them grow like crazy in spring to thicken them up. Yeah, it's definitely hard growing tropical trees in southwestern Ontario here, a cold climate, but it can be done. It's just, you've got to expect, you know, slower growth than in a warmer climate. And definitely once you get the trees out into the sunshine, they do really, really well. Nothing beats sunlight. You can have all the LED lights you want, but nothing beats true sunlight. So that is all for today. I'm Nigel Saunders. Thanks for joining me in the Bonsai Zone.